Why was no one moving? The street had fallen silent, except for the distant hum of a generator and the faint rustle of torn flags above cracked concrete walls. Dust floated lazily through the golden evening light, cutting through what had once been a marketplace, now nothing but burned-out stalls and hollow-eyed faces. She stood in the middle of it all, helmet slightly tilted down, gloved hands clenched, waiting. Waiting for him. At first glance, she seemed like any other soldier, the kind that blends into the urban wreckage. But beneath the worn fabric of her uniform, beneath the Kevlar vest and scratched shoulder patches, lay a storm she'd been carrying for years. A storm no one saw, no one wanted to see. And maybe that's why they kept sending her back out here, because they mistook silence for strength. "Target not responding," came a voice through her earpiece. Static buzzed. "No movement since visual contact. You sure he's here?" Her jaw tightened. "He's here," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else, "and he's waiting for me to blink first." The man across the street was older than the intel photo had suggested, beard grayer, posture heavier, but his eyes, those eyes were unmistakable, cold, patient, and too still for an innocent man. 3 days ago, intelligence flagged him as a financier for a rogue cell, the kind that didn't plant bombs for politics but for chaos. His name, Qasim Darzi, a ghost in the city, a man who vanished between safe houses and funeral processions, who taught hatred like sermons and bought loyalty with fear. And now, for the first time in 6 years, he wasn't running. He was just sitting on the steps of a shattered mosque, hands on his knees, head bowed, like a man waiting for judgment. Her finger hovered just beside the trigger guard of the rifle slung across her chest. She hated that her heart was racing, not because of him, but because of what he represented. Because every operation like this dug at something deeper, older. Something that had broken in her the day she watched her younger brother board a bus to school and never come home. They told her later that the bus had been hit by a roadside bomb, that it was the work of a cell just like Qasim's, that men like him had written the orders. And that was the day she stopped believing in words like justice and started chasing something colder. "Command, this is Raven," she murmured into the comm. "Visual confirmed, he's not running." "Copy, Raven, standing by for your call." Her call, always her call. She exhaled slowly, the breath fogging against the edge of her visor. This wasn't supposed to be personal, not anymore. But then again, how could it not be? She took a step forward. The rubble shifted beneath her boots, scattering bits of glass and shell casing. People were watching from behind blown-out windows and makeshift curtains, the usual mix of curiosity and fear. None of them would remember her name. They never did, but they'd remember this. The day the street went silent. "Do you think he even knows?" came a voice beside her, Lieutenant Vega, young, too young, his first tour, the kind who still wrote letters home, about what he's done. She didn't answer, because that was the thing that haunted her most, not that he knew, but that he didn't care. Vega shifted, adjusting the strap of his carbine. "Orders." "Hold." She stared across the street, narrowing her eyes. Something was wrong, too calm, too obvious. Then he moved. It was small, the twitch of a shoulder, the faintest shift of weight. But it was enough. Enough for every muscle in her body to coil, for every thought to dissolve into instinct. "Contact," she hissed. Vega froze. "Where?" She didn't respond. The movement repeated, a subtle lean, this time to the left. Not the twitch of a man nervous or ready to run. The posture of a man reaching for something he shouldn't. "Hands where I can see them," she shouted, breaking the silence that had settled over the street. Her voice echoed against stone and steel. Qasim didn't look up, didn't flinch, he just kept shifting. And then his hand slid beneath his robe. The next second was chaos. Vega dove for cover, shouting into his comm. Civilians screamed, scattering into alleys and doorways. And she moved without thinking, rifle up, breath locked, finger brushing the trigger she'd promised herself she wouldn't touch until she knew. But there was something she hadn't told them. She knew this man, not from a file, not from satellite photos, but from a memory she'd buried so deep it almost felt like fiction. Qasim Darzi had been there that day, the day the bus exploded. Not on the trigger, not in the van, but there, watching, smiling. A bystander who orchestrated death with a phone call and a nod. And now he was here, reaching for something again. "Drop it," she shouted, voice cracking under the weight of it. "Don't." But the street had already gone silent. His hand emerged, empty, palm open, trembling. The world held its breath. For a long, terrible moment, no one moved. Not Vega, not the snipers hidden on rooftops, not the terrified civilians pressed against crumbling walls. Just her staring at the man who'd built his legacy on the blood of the innocent, now holding nothing but air. And then he looked up. Their eyes met across 20 meters of rubble and ruin, and in that gaze she saw something that chilled her more than any weapon ever could. Not defiance, not fear. Recognition. Like he knew who she was. "Do it," he mouthed silently. "Finish it." Her finger tightened against the trigger. But she didn't pull. Not yet. Because somewhere in the chaos, a part of her, a part she thought she'd buried under armor and orders, whispered a question she didn't want to hear. Was this justice or revenge? Raven's status. Command's voice crackled through the radio, distant and impatient. She didn't answer, couldn't, because the line between duty and desire had never felt thinner. Qasim lowered his hand slowly, deliberately, and then, in a move so unexpected it stopped time, he stood. No weapon, no threat, just a quiet, almost reverent rise to his feet. He stepped off the mosque steps and walked into the street. Vega cursed under his breath. What's he doing? She didn't know, but every instinct screamed that this wasn't surrender. It was a message, a statement, a challenge. He walked until he was less than 10 meters away, close enough that she could see the faint scar running down his cheek, close enough that she could smell the smoke in his clothes. Then he stopped. "You don't remember me," he said softly, voice barely audible over the wind. "But I remember you." Her heart stuttered. "What did you say?" He smiled, a thin, tired smile. "The bus, the explosion, you were there, weren't you?" The ground tilted beneath her. The air felt thinner, colder. And just like that, the silence wasn't silence anymore. It was memory, screams, shattered glass, the echo of a brother's laugh cut short. Her finger trembled against the trigger. "Orders, Raven," Command repeated. "Do you copy?" But she wasn't listening, not anymore. Because for the first time in years, she realized this mission wasn't about him. It never was. It was about her. The silence deepened, heavy, suffocating, absolute. And in that silence something shifted, not in the street, not in the city, but inside her. He thought she wouldn't react. He thought she'd become another ghost chasing vengeance. But he was wrong. Because sometimes the loudest act of defiance is refusing to pull the trigger. The barrel of her rifle wavered just slightly, and she hated that he could see it. He knew that was the worst part, he knew. The man who had burned entire lives to the ground with orders and money and ideology now stood in the middle of the road like none of it had mattered. And maybe, to him, it hadn't. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice low, hoarse. Qasim didn't answer at first. He just stared at her, calm as stone, as if he'd been waiting for this conversation all his life. "Because everything ends eventually," he said. "Even hatred." "Hatred?" She spat the word out like it was poison. "You don't get to use that word." Vega shifted beside her. "Ma'am." "Not now." Her eyes never left Qasim. He tilted his head, curious. "I expected more from you." It was a jab meant to sting, and it did. She'd been told countless times that emotion was a liability, that a good operative was nothing but a tool, sharp, precise, unfeeling. But she was done pretending she didn't bleed, done pretending she hadn't come here for reasons that had nothing to do with the mission. She lowered the rifle just a fraction. "Hands behind your head," she ordered. He didn't move. "I said hands." "Or what?" he interrupted softly. "You'll shoot me here, in front of them." He nodded toward the broken windows, the shadowed doorways where faces watched from the dark. "You want them to see you kill an unarmed man." Her pulse roared in her ears. He was playing the long game, forcing her to confront not just him, but herself. Because if she shot him now, she'd become part of the very cycle she swore to end. "Raven, this is command," the radio hissed. "Status update. Extraction inbound. Secure the target." Target? Not a man, not a monster, just a target. And yet when she looked at him, all she saw was the empty seat at a family dinner table, a boy's shoes never worn again. "Cuffs," she said finally, voice steady. "Now." Vega moved in slowly, weapon raised, step by careful step. Qasim didn't resist. He knelt on the cracked pavement, hands behind his head, the picture of compliance. And yet it felt wrong, too easy. "Eyes up," she told Vega quietly. "Something off." "Copy." The sound came before the flash, a faint metallic click buried beneath the street's uneasy silence. It was enough to make her heart stop. "DOWN," she shouted, tackling Vega just as the blast ripped through the northern wall. The world erupted, fire, dust, and screaming metal. Debris slammed into the street, sending a wave of heat and pressure rolling over them. The air was suddenly thick with the taste of ash and gunpowder. Her ears rang, her vision blurred, but through the haze she saw him gone. Qasim Darzi had vanished. "Vega," she yelled. "I'm good," he coughed, spitting blood and dust. "Ambush North Alley." Of course it had been too easy. He never planned to surrender. He'd been buying time. She was on her feet before the debris had even stopped falling. "Command, we're compromised," she barked into her comm. "I repeat, target is mobile, northbound on foot." "Negative," Raven, pull back. "Exfil window is closing." "Negative," she snapped. "I'm not losing him again." She didn't wait for a reply. Boots pounding against fractured stone, lungs burning, she sprinted into the smoke. Her rifle hugged tight against her chest, eyes darting between shadows and movement. The alley ahead twisted like a maze of ruin, the perfect ground for an escape. "Left," Vega shouted behind her. She turned just in time to see a flash of a figure, slipping through a rusted gate. Her heart surged. "I've got him." The alley narrowed, the sound of her own breathing deafening in the confined space. Qasim was fast, too fast for a man his age, but rage lent her speed. So did memory. She rounded the corner and froze. He was standing at the far end of the alley, gun in hand, not aimed at her, aimed at a boy. 12, maybe 13. Skinny, barefoot, terrified. "Put it down," she shouted. Qasim smiled, that same infuriating, disarming smile. "You shoot me now and the boy dies." The child whimpered, frozen in place. His eyes were wide and wet, and they reminded her so painfully of another boy's eyes, her brother, that it almost broke her. "Let him go." "Why would I?" he asked calmly. "He's nothing to you." "He's everything," she said through clenched teeth. For the first time, Qasim looked uncertain. "You think this will change anything? You kill me, another takes my place. Another bomb, another child, it doesn't stop." She took a slow, deliberate step forward. "Maybe not, but maybe it stops with you." The silence stretched thin between them. Then in a sudden, fluid motion, Qasim shoved the boy aside and bolted. She fired one shot, a clean burst of suppressed thunder, but it missed, ricocheting off stone as he vanished into the labyrinth of the old city. "Damn it," she hissed, slamming her fist into the wall. Vega rounded the corner seconds later, panting. "You hit him." She shook her head. "He's gone." "Command, not going to like this." She didn't care. The boy was still crying, clutching his scraped knees. She knelt down beside him, removing her helmet so he could see her face human, not faceless. "SHHH," she whispered gently, "you're safe now." He didn't answer, just stared at her with a mixture of fear and gratitude. "Let's get him to the med station," Vega said softly. She nodded, but her mind was already miles ahead, following the trail of a man who seemed to vanish just when she was close enough to end it. That night she couldn't sleep. The base was quiet, the usual hum of generators and distant gunfire a lullaby of war. But her mind refused to rest. It replayed every detail, the explosion, the boy, the way Qasim had looked at her when he said you were there, weren't you? It wasn't just a taunt, it was a clue. He knew something, something more than the bombing, something about her. At 0200, she slipped into the operations center, eyes burning from exhaustion. The duty officer looked up from his screen. "Can't sleep. Run every known safehouse linked to Darzi. Prioritize those near the southern sector." Now. He didn't argue. Within minutes, the satellite feeds were scrolling across the monitors, coordinates and timestamps filling the room with cold light. And there a flicker of movement, heat signature, 3 blocks from the blast site. Her pulse quickened. "Get Vega," she said. "We move in 10. The mission briefing was quick and brutal. No room for mistakes. No backup. Just them, the night, and the weight of unfinished justice. As they prepared to leave, Vega hesitated. "You sure about this?" Command said. "Command not here," she cut him off. "I am." He sighed. "You're going to get us court-martialed." "Maybe," she said, loading a fresh magazine. "But I'm not losing him again." The city was a ghost at night, empty streets and flickering lamps, the kind of silence that felt alive. Every step echoed, every shadow whispered. They reached the perimeter of the safe house just before dawn. 2 guards outside, bored, half asleep. "Non-lethal," she whispered. Vega nodded. 2 suppressed shots later, the guards were down, unconscious. She pressed her back against the crumbling wall, listening. Voices inside. Low, calm, confident. Then a name. Her name. It hit her like a punch to the chest. They were talking about her. She exchanged a look with Vega. "They know I'm here." "What do we do?" She swallowed hard, heart hammering. "We go in." They breached the door in a flash of splintered wood and shouted commands. Inside, chaos exploded, men scrambling for weapons, papers scattering across the floor. She moved like a storm, clearing corners, suppressing threats, until only one figure remained. Qasim Darzi. He stood at the far end of the room, hands raised, the same calm smile on his face. "Took you long enough." "On your knees," she shouted. He didn't move. "You want to know the truth?" he asked quietly. "The real reason I was there that day." Her breath caught. "Because someone you trust sent me." The room seemed to tilt. Her grip on the rifle tightened. "What are you talking about?" "You think you know this story," he said, voice steady, almost gentle. "But you don't. And when you find out who did, you'll wish you had killed me today." Before she could react, before she could demand answers, he did something that froze her blood. He smiled, and then he pressed something into his palm. "A detonator." "No," she screamed. The world vanished in white. The explosion swallowed everything. Heat, pressure, and light collided into a single, blinding instant, the kind that made seconds stretch into forever. She felt herself lifted, weightless for a heartbeat, before the ground slammed into her, and darkness clawed its way over her vision. There was no sound at first, just a ringing, a long, high-pitched whine that drowned out the chaos around her. Then fragments. Shouts, boots, the metallic scrape of weapons being raised, Vega's voice calling her name. "Raven, Raven, stay with me." Her eyes fluttered open to a blur of fire and smoke. The safe house was gone, or what was left of it was collapsing in on itself, flames licking at its broken skeleton. Somewhere to her right, the sound of gunfire popped through the haze. Move, Vega's hands were under her arms, dragging her toward cover. We have to go. She coughed sharp, violent as dust filled her lungs. Qasim. He's gone, Vega said, voice shaking. He's gone. Gone. The word hit harder than the blast. Not dead, not captured, gone again. She tried to push herself up, but pain ripped through her shoulder, hot, searing, relentless. Shrapnel, deep. She gritted her teeth, fighting the urge to scream. Command, this is Vega, he shouted into the calm. We're compromised, repeat, compromised. Operator down, requesting medevac. Negative, the radio crackled back. Airspace is contested, you're on your own. On their own, again. She forced herself upright, blinking through the haze. We move, she rasped. We move now. Raven, you're injured. I said we move. Her legs felt like lead, every step a battle, but standing still wasn't an option. Qasim was out there, and if he had detonated a charge here, it wasn't the end game. It was a diversion. Something bigger was coming. They stumbled through the back alley, weaving between shadows and gunfire. Civilians screamed in the distance. Sirens wailed. The city had woken up to war again because Qasim Darzi wanted it that way. When they finally collapsed behind the burnt-out shell of an armored vehicle, Vega tore a strip of fabric from his vest and pressed it against her shoulder. You're bleeding bad, he muttered. Doesn't matter. It does matter. Not yet. He looked at her, eyes searching. What did he mean, someone you trust? She didn't answer because she didn't know. But the way he'd said it, calm, deliberate, almost gentle, it wasn't a bluff. It was a truth meant to fracture her. And it was working. She stared at the city skyline, smoke twisting into the dawn. We're missing something, she whispered. Something bigger. Vega sat beside her, silent for a long moment. You know, I used to think people like him were born evil, he said quietly. But now I'm not so sure. She turned to him. I think they're made, he continued, piece by piece, by war, by revenge, by people like us. It was the kind of thought most soldiers didn't say out loud, the kind that lived in the back of your mind, festering. Maybe, she said softly, but that doesn't mean we stop them. He nodded. No, it just means we understand what we're fighting. The silence that followed was heavier than the smoke. By the time they reached the forward operating base hours later, word of the failed capture had already spread. Command was furious, not about the explosion, not about the escape, but about her decision to go against orders. You disobeyed a direct command, Colonel Reeves said, his voice cold and clipped. Do you have any idea what kind of storm you've just created? She stood rigid, blood crusted on her uniform, bandage wrapped tight around her shoulder. I had him, she said simply. But you don't now, do you? Reeves shot back. Because you thought you knew better. It wasn't anger in his voice. It was disappointment. That was worse. Sir, with respect, Vega interjected, the intel was solid. We had to act. Reeves' gaze didn't leave her. She made the call, and she'll answer for it. A silence stretched between them. She'd been here before, not this room, not this mission, but this moment. The moment where her need to finish something outweighed protocol, and every time it had cost her. But this time felt different. This time it felt personal. When they were dismissed, Vega followed her out into the cold night air. You're not quitting, are you? She stared at the horizon, a jagged line of black and orange. Quitting isn't the word, she said quietly, but I'm not done. And she meant it. That night she sat alone in the intel bay, replaying the explosion over and over, frame by frame. She studied Qasim's body language, his tone, his words. Someone you trust sent me. The phrase looped in her mind like a broken record. Who? Who could have possibly? Then she saw it, a detail so small she almost missed it. Just before he detonated the device, Qasim glanced not at her, not at Vega, but at a small camera in the corner of the room. A surveillance unit. Military issue. Someone had been watching, someone inside. Her heart started to race. She pulled the access logs for the feed. Most were routine security officers, tech personnel, but one name stood out. Colonel Reeves. It didn't make sense. He had clearance, yes. But why monitor a Black Ops raid in real time, unless he knew Qasim would be there? She leaned back, heart hammering. Could it be true? Could he be the one Qasim was referring to? Her mind resisted the idea. Reeves was a career soldier, decorated, disciplined, loyal. But then again, loyalty meant nothing in this war. People switched sides for money, power, ideology, and betrayal often wore the face you trusted most. She needed proof. The next morning, before sunrise, she walked into Reeves' office unannounced. He looked up from a stack of reports, expression unreadable. "Something on your mind, Raven? Did you access the live feed during the raid?" He didn't flinch. "I monitor every operation." "Why didn't you tell me Qasim might be rigged with explosives?" He set his pen down slowly. "Because I didn't know." "Bullshit." The word hung in the air like a gunshot. His eyes narrowed. "Watch yourself, Lieutenant." But she didn't care. "He said someone I trusted sent him." He looked at the camera before the blast. "You were watching. Were you working with him?" Reeves leaned back in his chair, a slow, deliberate movement. "Careful, Raven. Accusations like that can end a career." "I'm not talking about a career," she said. "I'm talking about my brother." The words slipped out before she could stop them, and for the first time, Reeves' expression changed just slightly. "I know," he said quietly. The room spun. "What?" "I know about the bus, about your brother, about why you joined the program." Her mouth went dry. "How?" "Because I was there." The silence that followed was suffocating. She stared at him, unable to speak, unable to breathe. What do you mean you were there?" she finally whispered. He didn't answer, not directly. "There are things you don't understand about that day," he said, "about who was really behind it, about why we've kept Qasim alive all these years." She felt the floor tilt beneath her. "Alive?" Reeves nodded. "You think this is about justice. It's not. It never was. Qasim is part of something much bigger, something that keeps the world from falling apart." "By blowing up school buses," she snapped. "By keeping the monsters on a leash," he said. "You'll understand soon enough." She stared at him, rage boiling beneath her skin. "No," she said, voice trembling. "I don't think I will." And with that, she turned and walked out, not because she was done, but because she knew she was standing at the edge of something far darker than she'd imagined. The mission was no longer about revenge. It was about truth. And for the first time, she wasn't sure she wanted to know it. Why was the rain falling so softly, almost as if the sky itself was mourning what they were about to do? It had been 3 days since the convoy incident, the night that changed everything. The quiet aftermath still clung to the team like an unwanted shadow. Streets that once hummed with distant chatter now sat in uneasy silence, and the mission, once simple, once defined, had become something deeper, darker, and far more personal. Arya stood by the cracked window of the abandoned apartment they were using as a temporary base. Drops of rain slid down the glass like memories she wished she could erase. She hadn't spoken much since that night. None of them had. And yet, in the silence, every unspoken word weighed heavier than gunfire ever could. But tonight was different. Tonight, the mission shifted from defense to offense. They were going after him. The man responsible not just for the attack on their convoy but for the chain of civilian deaths that followed. An arms broker, known only by the codename Hallam. He operated in the shadows of the old city, under layers of security, politics, and paranoia. And while the world debated jurisdiction and treaties, Arya's team had no such luxury. They were ghosts sent where diplomacy failed. 3 checkpoints, each with eyes on the street and drones overhead, whispered Rafe, sliding a satellite map across the dusty table. His voice was calm, but his fingers betrayed the tension, tapping rhythmically against the map's corner. We breach here, he pointed to a narrow alley between 2 warehouses. 10 minutes in, 7 minutes out. Extraction from the South Canal. 7 minutes, Arya repeated, her voice distant, almost mechanical. That's enough. Kai, who'd been unusually quiet, finally spoke. Enough to what? Get in and get out, or enough to kill him? The question hung in the air. They all knew the answer. Arya didn't flinch. Enough to end this. Silence, only the rain answered. The night of the operation was colder than expected, a biting wind sweeping through the city's deserted industrial sector. Shadows stretched long under the pale glow of flickering streetlights, and every step sounded louder than it should have. Arya adjusted the strap of her rifle and checked her comms. Her heartbeat was steady, but her thoughts were not. Every breath she took carried the weight of a face she couldn't forget, a boy, no older than 10, lying motionless beside the wreckage of the convoy days earlier. A civilian casualty, one they hadn't been able to save. It was his face that drove her now, not the mission, not revenge, just a need for something that resembled justice. Echo 1 in position, whispered Kai. Echo 2 ready, came Rafe's voice. Arya closed her eyes briefly, letting the rain touch her skin. Echo lead, move. They flowed through the alleys like water, soundless, shapeless, unstoppable. The first checkpoint was a pair of mercenaries smoking under a rusted overhang. They never saw it coming. 2 suppressed shots, 1 for each. Bodies down, dragged into the shadows. The second checkpoint, deeper inside, was trickier. A camera hidden in a broken street lamp, rotating slowly. Arya held her breath, counted the sweep. 3 seconds. That was their window. They moved through the dark like memories gone before the camera turned back. And then came the third. The alley opened into a wide courtyard lined with shipping containers. Floodlights painted everything in harsh white, and at the far end, surrounded by guards and armored SUVs, was Hallam. He was older than Arya expected. Gray hair, heavy frame, but eyes sharp and calculating, the kind that had seen blood and never lost sleep over it. Eyes on target, Rafe whispered. Take the left flank, Arya replied. Kai, cover the exit, no one escapes. It was supposed to be simple, a clean, quiet strike, but missions like these never stay simple. A door slammed somewhere above them, and suddenly the night exploded. Contact north window. Bullets rained down like steel rain, carving sparks into the concrete around them. Arya dove behind a container, breath shallow, heart pounding. The element of surprise gone. Too many, Rafe shouted. We need to pull back. No, Arya hissed into her mic. We finish this. And then she saw him, Hallam, being rushed toward a vehicle. Time slowed. Her breath steadied. Every sound fell away until all she could hear was the thrum of her own heartbeat. She raised her rifle, aligned the sights, squeezed the trigger. The shot cut through the chaos, precise and final. But not final enough. The bullet tore through Hallam's shoulder, not his heart. He stumbled, screamed, but was still moving. His men dragged him into the SUV, and in seconds he was gone. Damn it, Rafe cursed. He's escaping. Not yet, Arya whispered. We're not done. They barely made it out alive. The extraction was messy, a running firefight through rain-soaked alleys, drones circling overhead, boots splashing through puddles as they ducked into the waiting transport truck. Inside, breathless and soaked, the silence was deafening. No one spoke, not Rafe, not Kai, not Arya. She stared at her bloodied hands, the smell of gunpowder still clinging to her. The image of Hallam being pulled away burned into her mind. So close, and yet not enough. Do you know what this means? Rafe finally said, voice heavy. He'll disappear now, change location, new name, we might never get another shot. Arya didn't respond. She just stared out the rain-streaked window, watching the city lights blur into streaks of gold and gray. Kai leaned forward, his tone softer. You hit him, that's something. Something, she repeated, almost to herself, but not justice. She turned her gaze back to the dark road ahead, and for the first time in years, doubt crept into her chest like a poison. Had she failed? Or was this part of something bigger, something not yet finished? Because deep down she knew this wasn't over. Hallam was wounded, and wounded men made mistakes, mistakes she would be waiting for. Later that night, long after the others had fallen asleep, Arya sat alone by the window. The rain had stopped. The city was quiet again, too quiet. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. A photograph, the boy from the convoy, his smile, his future stolen. Her fingers trembled slightly as she traced the edges of the photo. This isn't over, she whispered into the dark. I swear it. And somewhere, far beyond the city, a wounded man clutched his shoulder, screaming orders at his men to move him somewhere no one could find him. But no matter how far he ran, no matter how deep he hid, Arya would follow. Because for her, this was never just a mission. It was a promise. And promises, once made, were not meant to be broken. The rain began again, softer this time, gentler, like the heartbeat of something inevitable. And for the first time since the mission began, Arya felt it, a shift, a stirring deep within. This wasn't failure. This was the beginning of the end. What if this was all a trap, not for Hallam but for her? The thought had been gnawing at Arya's mind for days, burrowing deeper each time she replayed the mission in her head. The botched raid, the sudden ambush, the perfect timing of the enemy's response. It all pointed to one brutal truth she didn't want to accept. Someone had tipped him off. And whoever it was, they were close. The rain had finally stopped. In its place, the city was wrapped in a damp, uneasy stillness. Arya sat alone on the rooftop of their safe house, legs dangling over the edge, eyes tracing the labyrinth of rooftops and alleys below. Dawn was only a smear of pale orange on the horizon, but she'd been awake all night, haunted by every wrong move, every scream, every bullet that had missed its mark. Her hands were steady, but her chest, it felt like a storm. Can't sleep either. Kai's voice was quiet, cautious. He stepped onto the roof with 2 steaming cups of coffee and handed one to her. Didn't try, she murmured. They sat in silence for a long while, watching the city stir awake. Somewhere, a street vendor rolled up his metal shutter. Somewhere else, a stray dog barked at nothing. The world moved on, indifferent to the war they were fighting in its shadows. Kai finally spoke. You think it was luck, them knowing we were coming? Arya didn't answer immediately. She turned the cup in her hands, watching steam twist into the morning air. No, she said, it wasn't luck. Kai nodded slowly, as if he'd already known. Then we have a problem. Her jaw tightened, bigger than we thought. Later that day, the team gathered in the briefing room, a dim, windowless space lit only by the glow of a single hanging bulb. Rafe was already packing by the map board when Arya walked in. His usual calm was gone, replaced by a twitchy frustration that mirrored her own. Intel's dry, he said without preamble. Hallam vanished off the grid. No comms, no satellite traces, nothing, like he never existed. People like him don't disappear, Arya replied. They relocate, they restructure, they wait. And they kill, Rafe added grimly. We've already lost 2 informants, both executed, same signature. The room fell silent. Each of them knew what that meant. Hallam wasn't hiding, he was retaliating. We can't chase shadows, Kai said finally. If there's a leak inside our circle, we need to find it before we do anything else. And how do you propose we do that? Rafe shot back. Interrogate our own team. If that's what it takes. The tension thickened. It wasn't mistrust, not yet, but the seed of it was there, waiting to bloom. Arya let them argue for a moment before cutting through the noise. Enough. Her voice was sharp, commanding, the kind that silences a room. We do both, she said. We hunt Hallam and we hunt the leak, one step at a time. Where do we start? Kai asked. She pointed to the map. Here, East Sector, abandoned textile district. We have a lead, someone who supplied weapons to his men. He's not part of Hallam's core network, but he knows faces, names, maybe locations. Ray frowned. You trust this lead? No, she admitted, but I trust that he's scared, and scared men talk. The textile district was a graveyard of forgotten industry. Endless rows of crumbling warehouses, rusting machinery, and the ghosts of a workforce long gone. Dust danced in the thin shafts of light that slipped through shattered windows. The contact, a thin, jittery man named Zaid, was waiting where he said he'd be, inside a gutted factory office. His hands shook as Arya and Kai stepped through the door, weapons lowered but ready. You shouldn't have come here, he hissed. They're watching, always watching. Then speak fast, Arya said. Zaid swallowed hard, his eyes darting around like a trapped animal. Hallam is wounded, badly, but he's alive. They moved him 2 nights ago, not far, an old safe house near the northern rail line. Location? I don't know exactly, but I heard something about a meeting. Foreign buyers. They're moving product, weapons, tech in exchange for safe passage. Who's facilitating? Zaid hesitated, then leaned closer, voice trembling. Someone on the inside. Military. I don't know who, but they're high up. That's why he's untouchable. Arya's blood ran cold. Inside. The word echoed in her mind. She stepped closer, lowering her voice to a whisper that carried more weight than any threat. You're sure? Zaid nodded frantically. I swear it, that's all I know. Please, I told you everything. She studied his face, the fear, the desperation, and finally nodded. Get out of the city. Tonight. Don't stop until you're somewhere they can't find you. The drive back was silent, too silent. Kai stared out the window, his thoughts clearly racing. If he's telling the truth. He's telling the truth, Arya interrupted. Then we're in deeper than we thought. She didn't answer, because the truth was she'd suspected it for a while now. Little things, too little intel here, too much resistance there. Hallam's uncanny ability to stay one step ahead. It was all starting to make sense. Someone wasn't just leaking information. Someone was protecting him. And if that someone was inside their own network, then this mission wasn't just dangerous anymore. It was suicidal. That night Arya sat alone again, same rooftop, same silence, but something inside her had shifted. The mission no longer felt like a hunt. It felt like a reckoning. She reached for the dog tag around her neck, the one she'd worn since her brother died 5 years ago. A soldier, a dreamer, the reason she joined this life in the first place. He'd been betrayed too by politics, by promises that evaporated when the fighting got complicated. And now, staring into the night, she realized something bitter and clear. This wasn't about Hallam anymore. Not just him. It was about the system that let men like him survive, the rot within the walls they were sworn to defend. And she was done playing by their rules. Her comm crackled softly, Rafe's voice. We got movement. Satellite picked up a convoy near the northern line. Small, unmarked, could be him. Her pulse slowed, controlled, focused. Then we move, she said. Arya, if this is a trap, then it's the last one they'll ever set. The wind picked up, carrying the faint hum of a distant train. Somewhere beyond the city's edge, Hallam was still breathing, still plotting, still killing. But so was she. And she had no intention of stopping. Because when betrayal lives in the shadows, only one thing can bring it into the light. A reckoning. And hers had just begun. What if the convoy wasn't carrying Hallam at all, but something or someone meant to break her? The thought slithered through Arya's mind as she stared at the live drone feed flickering across the tablet screen. 4 vehicles, no insignias, no escorts, all moving with deliberate precision along the northern rail route just as the intel suggested. But something about the pattern felt wrong, too organized, too exposed. It felt like bait. And yet they couldn't ignore it, not when it was the first real lead in weeks. "Convoy is on the move," Rafe reported from the surveillance van, his voice a low hum through Arya's earpiece. "ETA 3 minutes to intercept point." Arya adjusted the strap of her rifle and glanced at Kai, crouched beside her behind a stack of rusted freight containers. He was checking the suppressor on his weapon, a ritual he did every time, even though she knew he didn't need to. "Still think this is real?" he asked quietly. "Doesn't matter," she replied. "We treat it like it is." Kai gave a small nod but didn't look convinced. Neither was she. The abandoned rail yard around them was soaked from the morning rain, every surface slick and glistening under the pale gray sky. The air smelled faintly of oil and rust, old industry and forgotten battles. It was the perfect place for an ambush. "Echo 1 in position," Arya whispered into her mic. "Echo 2 ready," came Rafe's reply. The hum of engines grew louder. Tires crunched against the gravel. Through the scope of her rifle, Arya tracked the lead vehicle, a matte black SUV with reinforced panels. The others followed close behind, moving slow, careful. "On your mark," Rafe said. Arya's finger hovered over the trigger, one breath in, one out, and then, "Wait." Her voice was barely a whisper, but it froze the team. Something in the last vehicle's window caught her eye, a glint, movement, a pair of eyes staring directly at her position. They knew. "Abort, pull back now," she hissed. Too late. The world erupted. The SUV convoy screeched to a halt as gunfire tore through the rain-soaked yard. Bullets sparked against metal. Dirt exploded around them. The air filled with the hiss of suppressed fire and the sharp cracks of return shots. "Contact multiple hostiles," Rafe shouted. Arya rolled behind cover, heart pounding. They'd been waiting for them, not Hallam, not cargo, but an entire kill team. "Flank left," she ordered, vaulting over a container and landing hard on the soaked ground. She moved like instinct, low, fast, relentless, her rifle barking short bursts as she pushed forward. Kai covered her from the right, dropping 2 hostiles with surgical precision. But for every one they took down, 2 more seemed to appear. "Where the hell are they coming from?" Kai shouted. "Doesn't matter," Arya snapped back. "We hold until the window opens." A grenade clinked against the ground near them. Arya barely had time to shove Kai behind a stack of steel drums before the explosion tore through the space they'd occupied seconds earlier. The blast slammed into her chest like a sledgehammer, throwing her into the mud. "Arya," Kai's voice was distant, muffled. Her ears rang, the world spun, but she forced herself up, gasping through the pain. The convoy was pulling back now, a retreat, not a rout. This wasn't meant to wipe them out, it was meant to test them. And they had passed, barely. "Fall back," she commanded, stumbling toward the extraction point. "We're compromised now." The aftermath was worse than the firefight. The safe house was silent, not the usual tense silence before a mission, but something heavier, something that felt like defeat. Rafe slammed a fist against the table. It was a setup from the start. Kai dropped into a chair, wiping blood from a cut above his eyebrow. "They knew we'd come. They wanted us there." Arya said nothing. She stood by the window, staring at the storm clouds rolling over the city skyline. Inside her chest, something old and familiar stirred doubt. But deeper than that, guilt. This was her call, her decision, and now they were no closer to Hallam than before. Worse, they'd shown their hand. "You think the leak's higher up?" Rafe asked finally. Maybe, Arya murmured. Or maybe we're not just fighting Hallam anymore. What do you mean? She turned from the window, her expression colder than they'd ever seen it. I mean someone wants him alive, and they're willing to burn us to keep it that way. The words hung in the air like smoke. Later that night, Arya found herself on the rooftop again, the same one she'd returned to night after night, as if the sky could offer answers the ground refused to give. The rain had stopped, but the wind still carried the bitter bite of unfinished business. Below, the city hummed, unaware of the small, invisible war being waged in its shadows. Kai joined her after a while. He didn't say anything at first, just stood beside her, watching the lights. You blame yourself, he said finally. She didn't deny it. I made the call. And we followed it. That's how this works. She sighed. It's not the mission I'm worried about. It's what comes after. Kai turned to her. What do you mean? Every move we make, someone is watching, adjusting, anticipating. That's not just a leak, that's strategy. And that means Hallam isn't just surviving, he's being guided. He frowned. By who? That's what I intend to find out. The breakthrough came 2 days later. A routine intercept. A low-level courier caught near the border. On him, a flash drive, encrypted but not well enough. Inside, transaction logs, arms deals, names, codes. And one file stood out. A series of secure communications between Hallam and a contact known only as Orion. Who the hell is Orion? Rafe muttered, scrolling through the files. Not a code name I've ever seen, Kai said. Arya stared at the screen in silence. Something about the language in the messages, the phrasing, the structure was familiar. Too familiar. Because she'd seen it before. In internal mission briefings. Orion isn't some criminal contact, she said slowly. It's someone inside our own command structure. The room went still. It was worse than they'd feared. Not just a mole, not just a leak. Someone with authority, someone trusted, was pulling strings on both sides of this war. Rafe rubbed his temples. If that's true, we can't trust anyone. Arya nodded. Exactly, which means from this moment on we don't ask for permission, we don't wait for orders, we finish this our way. Kai met her eyes. And if they come for us? She looked out the window, at the storm gathering once more over the city. Then we stop being soldiers, and we become something they can't control. That night, as the wind howled through the empty streets, Arya stood in front of a wall covered in maps, photographs, and names. Every line, every connection, every betrayal traced back to one word: Orion. And in that moment, something inside her shifted again, deeper, sharper, unbreakable. This wasn't about orders anymore. It wasn't even about Hallam. It was about the truth. And the truth had a way of burning everything in its path. She holstered her weapon, picked up her jacket, and turned to her team. No more waiting, she said. We hunt them all. And for the first time in weeks, the fear in her chest wasn't about failing. It was about what would happen when she finally succeeded. What if the enemy wasn't just ahead of them, but already among them? That question haunted Arya more than the gunfire, more than the blood, more than any mission she'd ever walked into. It was the kind of thought that got soldiers killed, the kind that poisoned trust and made every glance feel like a threat. But now it wasn't paranoia. It was fact. Orion. The name had become a ghost in every conversation, a specter lurking behind every mission, every decision, every betrayal. And whoever they were not just leaking intel, they were orchestrating the entire war from behind a desk. The rain returned the night she decided to go rogue. The small, decrepit safe house deep in the city's industrial sector was barely holding together, its roof leaking, walls cracked. But it was perfect for what she needed now: invisibility. No orders, no oversight, no command. Just her team and the truth. Kai was the first to arrive, pulling off his rain-soaked jacket and tossing it onto a chair. He looked exhausted, older somehow, not from age, but from the weight of what they were about to do. "You're sure about this?" he asked. "Sure," Arya repeated, checking the bolt on her rifle. "No, but I'm done being predictable." He gave a wry smile. "I'll take that as a yes." Rafe walked in next, his face carved with that same frustration that had been building since the ambush. "We're officially AWOL now, you know that. No backup, no extraction, no support." Arya looked up at him. "We've never had support, Rafe. We just pretended we did." There was a silence, heavy, real, and then Rafe nodded. "Then we do this our way." The plan was reckless, suicidal even, but it was their only shot. If Orion was pulling strings at the top, then they needed to pull the thread from below, start with Hallam's network and work upward until the web unraveled. That meant infiltration, tracking, cutting deals with devils they'd once sworn to eliminate. Arya had spent nights combing through the encrypted messages from the intercepted drive. One of them, a shipment manifest disguised as a financial report, pointed to a single name, Nadim Varak. An intermediary, a broker, and most importantly, a man who had spoken to both Hallam and Orion. If they could get to Nadim, they could find the rest of the chain. The city's underbelly was a place even the military didn't tread, a labyrinth of black markets, backroom deals, and silent assassins. It was the perfect place to disappear, and the worst place to make a mistake. Nadim operated out of an abandoned luxury hotel turned weapons depot. Getting in required more than stealth, it required deception. And Arya, for the first time in years, found herself slipping into a role she despised, pretending to be someone she was. The night of the infiltration, she ditched the tactical gear for a civilian coat and scarf. Kai and Rafe followed at a distance, blending into the crowded streets. The hotel loomed ahead, its once golden facade now a rust-streaked skeleton, its grand windows boarded over, its halls crawling with armed men. Arya approached the side entrance with calm precision, heart steady, mind sharp. A guard blocked her path, hand resting lazily on his weapon. "Invitation?" he asked in a thick accent. She met his gaze with cold confidence. "Tell Nadim that Echo has arrived." The guard frowned. Then his eyes widened slightly, recognition. He said nothing more and stepped aside. She was in. Nadim was waiting on the 12th floor, lounging in a leather chair like a man who believed he was untouchable. He was younger than she expected, mid-30s, sleek, polished, with the kind of smile that made you want to punch him. "You're either very brave," he said, swirling a glass of wine, "or very stupid." "Brave mostly," Arya replied. "Stupid would have been not showing up." He laughed softly. "And why have you shown up?" "Because you're going to help me find Hallam." His smile didn't falter, but his eyes sharpened. "Am I?" "Yes," she said, stepping closer, "because I know who you've been talking to, Orion." The name hit him like a punch. A small twitch in the jaw, a flicker of hesitation in his eyes. That was all she needed to confirm it. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said quickly. "Then you won't mind if I hand over every encrypted file I've pulled from your network to the Directorate," she said calmly. "They'll trace every payment, every meeting, every message right back to you." A beat of silence, then another. Nadim set down his glass. "What do you want?" "Names, locations, everything you know about Orion." He exhaled slowly. "You're playing with fire." "I've been burning for years," she replied. They left the hotel with more than they'd hoped for. Nadim had given them fragments, partial routes, coded references, mentions of meetings in neutral zones. But one detail stood out among the rest: an upcoming summit. Not a deal, not a transfer, a meeting. Hallam, Orion's envoy, high-level operatives from 3 nations, all in one place. The location, a remote airstrip just outside the city. The date, 3 nights from now. The stakes, everything. That night back at the safe house, The weight of what they'd uncovered finally hit them. "This is it," Rafe said, leaning over the map. "If we pull this off, we don't just take Hallam, we take Orion. We cut the head off the entire operation." "And if we fail?" Kai asked. Arya didn't hesitate. "Then we die knowing the truth." No one argued. Because by now this wasn't about survival. It wasn't about orders. It wasn't even about revenge. It was about something deeper, the promise they'd made to themselves, to each other, to every innocent face caught in the crossfire. They weren't just soldiers anymore. They were the reckoning. That night Arya couldn't sleep. The rain had stopped, the city was quiet, and yet her heart wouldn't rest. She stood by the window, staring out into the dark, lost in memories she'd long buried. Her brother's smile, his last message before the mission that killed him. "We're doing the right thing, Arya, even if no one ever knows." She closed her eyes. The ache was still there, not as raw as before, but deeper now, like an old scar that still throbbed when the weather changed. "Are you ready for this?" Kai's voice came softly from the doorway. She turned, meeting his eyes. "I've been ready since the day they put him in the ground." He nodded. "Then let's finish it." The storm was coming. They could feel it. Not the kind that poured from the sky, but the kind that changed everything. 3 days, one airstrip, one chance to expose the invisible hand that had guided every death, every betrayal, every lie. And as Arya stared into the night, the city lights flickering like distant fires, she felt it deep in her bones, a storm that wouldn't end in silence. It would end in fire. And when it did, the world would finally know the truth. The morning of the operation felt wrong, too still, too quiet, like the air itself was holding its breath. Even the city, usually a symphony of distant engines and far-off sirens, had gone eerily silent. Arya stood at the edge of the rooftop, watching the horizon as the first pale streaks of dawn bled into the sky. Below her, the world was waking up, vendors setting up stalls, children chasing stray dogs, soldiers patrolling streets they no longer controlled. It was all so ordinary, so painfully normal, and yet today everything would change. 3 days, she whispered to herself. 3 days, and it all comes down to this. Kai approached from behind, adjusting the strap on his rifle. No turning back now. "There never was," Arya replied without looking at him. Rafe joined them moments later, a map rolled under his arm and a grim determination in his eyes. "The airstrip's perimeter's tighter than we expected. Thermal drones, motion sensors, layered patrols. This isn't a simple breach, it's a fortress." Arya finally turned, her voice calm but cold. "Then we break the fortress." The plan was simple on paper. They'd split into 3 teams. Rafe would disable the outer surveillance grid from a relay tower half a mile away. Kai would plant charges along the south perimeter, creating chaos and a breach point. Arya, disguised as a logistics officer, would infiltrate the summit itself. Once Hallam and Orion's envoy were confirmed on site, they'd initiate Phase Black. Simultaneous detonation, forced extraction, and public broadcast of the evidence they'd gathered. If everything went perfectly, the world would see the faces behind the war. If anything went wrong, they'd likely die before anyone even knew they were there. The hours crawled by. Gear was checked and rechecked. Ammunition counted. Comms encrypted. Every second was measured, every move choreographed. And yet beneath the precision, beneath the layers of training and tactics, a tension hummed like a live wire. It wasn't fear, it was something sharper, finality. By dusk, they were on the move. The safe house was left empty, save for a single photograph Arya taped to the wall, her brother, in uniform, smiling under the Afghan sun. She didn't take it with her, because she wasn't planning to come back. The airstrip lay sprawled across a barren expanse of desert just beyond the city's industrial fringe. Once a civilian hub, it had been quietly repurposed. Now, it was a shadow terminal for arms deals, covert landings, and untraceable disappearances. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the facility came alive with movement. Convoys rolling in under armed escort, unmarked aircraft taxiing onto the tarmac, men in suits shaking hands under the cover of floodlights. This was it, the beating heart of the chaos. Arya crouched in the back of a supply truck, dressed in the crisp uniform of a logistics officer, ID forged and biometric chip cloned from Nadam's files. Her pulse remained steady as the guard at the gate scanned her credentials. "Manifest," he asked. "Medical shipment for the summit personnel," she said smoothly. He nodded, waved her through. Step 1 complete. Meanwhile, Rafe was already in position, high on a communications tower overlooking the compound. He plugged a bypass unit into the relay node, overriding the airstrip's encrypted network. "Grid is blind," he whispered into comms. "You're clear." "Copy," Arya replied. A few hundred meters away, Kai knelt beside the chain-link fence, methodically wiring the last of the explosives. "South charges primed. I'll hold until you give the word." "Stay dark," Arya said. "We do this when they're all in the room." The conference hall was a former hangar, cavernous, echoing, lined with rows of temporary seating and projection screens. Guards lined the walls, their weapons casual but ready. At the far end, a raised dais waited for the key players. Arya kept her head down, wheeling the supply crate toward the staging area. Every step brought her closer to the center of the storm. Every face she passed was another possible threat. Then she saw him. Qasim, the man responsible for years of bombings, massacres, and displacements. The man whose orders had carved scars across continents. He was older now, silver creeping into his beard, but his presence radiated the same ruthless charisma. And beside him, a figure Arya didn't recognize, tall, composed, dressed in a plain black suit. He didn't speak. He didn't smile. But when he lifted his head and scanned the room, her blood turned to ice. Because his eyes were looking for her. They know. Her instincts screamed it before her mind could. "Rafe," she hissed into the comms, "change of plan. I think we're compromised." "Say again." "I'm pulling the schedule forward. Kai, detonate on my mark." "Arya, wait," Kai started. But it was too late. The man in the suit was moving now, whispering into an earpiece. Guards shifted, glances sharpened. The illusion of control shattered. She took a deep breath. "Mark." The night exploded. The southern fence vanished in a plume of fire and steel, shockwaves rolling across the tarmac. Sirens wailed, soldiers scrambled, and chaos erupted in every corner of the compound. "Perimeter breached," someone shouted. In the confusion, Arya moved, fast, silent, purposeful. She vaulted over the crate, drawing her sidearm and dropping 2 guards before they even turned. Rafe's override killed the floodlights, plunging the hall into strobing red emergency glow. "Go, go, go," Kai's voice crackled. "I'm inbound." Hallam's entourage scattered. The man in the suit barked orders, retreating toward a secure exit. Arya followed, weaving through smoke and screaming, and the staccato rattle of automatic fire. She caught up just as he reached the hangar doors. "Orion," she called out. He stopped, turned. And for the first time, she saw his face clearly. It wasn't some faceless warlord. It wasn't a foreign spy master. It wasn't even a mercenary. It was Commander Reyes. Her former the man who had recruited her, the man who'd sworn they were fighting for peace. The betrayal hit like a bullet. "You," she whispered, disbelief cracking her voice. "Who else?" he said calmly, lowering his weapon. "Who else had the access, the clearance, the vision?" Her grip on her pistol tightened. "You started this war." "No," Reyes said, stepping closer. "I designed it, and thanks to people like you, it's gone exactly as planned." "People like me." "Soldiers who think they're saving the world. All you ever do is keep it burning." A gunshot cracked the air. Arya flinched, but it wasn't hers. Rhys staggered, a bloom of red spreading across his chest. Behind him, Kai stood in the smoke, rifle still raised. "Couldn't let you monologue your way out of this one," he muttered. Rhys collapsed to the ground, coughing blood, eyes locked on Arya. "You can kill me, but you can't kill the system." "Watch me," she said, and pulled the trigger. The compound burned behind them as they fled into the night, data drives and hard evidence secured in a single encrypted pack. Hallam was dead. Orion was unmasked. The summit was destroyed. But victory didn't feel like triumph. It felt like exhaustion, like finally waking from a nightmare only to realize the scars were still there. "Do you think this ends it?" Rafe asked quietly as their truck disappeared into the desert. Arya stared at the horizon, the first light of dawn breaking through the smoke. "No," she said softly, "it's only the beginning." Because she understood now what her brother had meant, that saving the world wasn't about one mission, one enemy, one war. It was about standing up, again and again, even when the world refused to change. And for the first time in years, she wasn't running from the fire. She was walking straight into it.